Hello, good evening. My name is Catherine and I work with SEB Housing. And this is the information session for the upcoming 15 affordable rental units at Richmond Meadows 2 in Nantucket. These units are going to be made available during phases 5 and 6 of this community. So the purpose of this session is to give a little bit of background information on the affordable units. I'll also discuss the application eligibility and the lottery process, and then also what to expect after the lottery takes place. So I have some slides that you should be able to see if you have this on a computer or on your phone that I'll be flipping through during tonight's session. So if you have any questions during it, you can access the chat feature in your Zoom meeting, or you could unmute yourself and just let me know that you have a question. When you came into the session, you were muted just so we minimize unnecessary noise, but feel free to go ahead and chime in. The session is being recorded, and the reason for that is because it's going to be made available on SEB Housing's YouTube channel after tonight. So anyone who wasn't participating in this live session is able to view it after the fact. If you have any questions after tonight that you didn't think of, that you still would like to ask us, you can contact us at info@sebhousing.com or by calling that 617 number that's on your screen now. If there's any issues with logistics or you can't hear me, you can't view the screen, please let me know and I will get started. So SEB Housing, we are a affordable housing consulting group. We are not the leasing team at Richmond Meadows. We've been hired by the management team or by the developer to market the affordable units, conduct this information session, eventually conduct the lottery. We'll also be the ones who are screening applicants and determining their eligibility for this lottery. So in the initial phases of this affordable housing process, we are going to be your main point of contact rather than the leasing office over at Richmond Meadows. But then further along, so further down the line, the on-site management team in Nantucket will take over as the main point of contact. So there's a few steps in the process. The first is applying for the lottery itself. SEB Housing will determine if you are qualified for the affordable housing program. Based on the application that you've submitted, you're going to be self-reporting your information on that lottery application. You'll be in touch with SEB Housing during that time. We can answer any questions you have on the application or the affordable housing program, and we'll also run the lottery. The second step in the process is when you'll be in touch with the leasing office. And the leasing office will conduct a lease eligibility screening with you that's separate from the program screening that we do. So the leasing office's lease eligibility will be similar to, if you've rented before, similar to those types of screenings that you may be familiar with. So it could include credit checks, rental history, background checks, that sort of thing. And then the third step in the process is once you've been approved by the leasing office as lease eligible, you'll then be directed back to SEB Housing. And that's the point where you'll need to submit verification of your income, assets, and your tax documentation that you listed on your lottery application. Because keep in mind, again, when you submit your lottery application, you do not need to submit any supporting documentation to us at that point. It's later on in the process that you need to submit all of that. So you'll have about a week to 10 days to gather and submit that documentation to us once you've been lease approved, and we'll work with you to make sure that your application is complete at that point. So if you haven't already, you can check out more information about this lottery. If you go to our website, it's sebhousing.com, and you would click on the Affordable Housing Opportunities page and select, I want to rent, because this is a rental opportunity. And then there's a page specific to Richmond Meadows 2, so you would select that property, and you'll be taken to a page that's specific to Richmond Meadows. It has a downloadable version of the application, the lottery application that you can download or print out And there's also an information packet available on the website in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. And that information packet contains most of the information I'll be covering tonight. I won't have time to cover everything that's in that packet though, so even if you are attending this session, we always recommend that anyone who's interested in the apartments takes a look at that information packet. So if you choose to apply for the lottery at Richmond Meadows, you're going to need to first complete that lottery application. You can get it to us in one of several ways. The most common way that people submit it to us is by email, or scanning it, attaching it to an email. You can do that. You can fax it to us. The fax number is on the first page of the application. You can send it by regular mail to our Needham office, or you can, if you're in the Needham area for any reason, you can drop it in the 24-hour drop box that is at our location at 257 Hillside Ave. So whichever one of those options works best for you. Also, if you're already living in Nantucket, you could also pick up a lottery application. They're made available at the public library, which is at 1 India Street, and then at the Richmond Meadows 2 leasing office, which is already established because there have been other phases of this apartment complex, I should say, and that's at 1 Orchard Place. So if you want a physical copy and you don't want to download it from the website or whatever it may be, you can get a physical copy there. We do encourage you to get your lottery application in early. It's fairly brief. It should only take you about 10 minutes to complete. Again, there's no supporting documentation that you need to submit at this early stage, but we just like to make sure that your application is complete. Once we get that, we can work with you to make sure that you have everything in line. Applications are due by January 12th, so just a little bit less than a month now in order to get into this lottery. Your application would need to be delivered by the 12th or postmarked by that date in order to be considered for this lottery. You do not need to be a resident of Nantucket to apply for the lottery. There will, however, be several units that will have local preference for residents of Nantucket, and I'll discuss that a little bit later on, but that should not at all deter you from applying if you're not living on the island. All right, so a little more information on the property and the units themselves. So they do have a website, Nantucket, or Richmond Meadows, I should say, and it's on your screen now. So it's richmondgreatpoint.com/meadows-2. And you can check out that website for more floor plans, amenities, some more information about the affordable units. We have been told by the leasing office that the affordable units are expected to be available in April. So they have a little bit of a delay. So there will be a slight delay between the lottery date, which will be in February, and when you could potentially lease one of these units, which would be April. So just keep that in mind. So this, again, is phase 5 and 6 of Richmond Meadows 2. It's the latest phase in a larger housing community, which has a total of 225 rental apartments. It's located off of Old South Road in Nantucket. There are 15 affordable apartment units within this lottery. So those 15 units feature stainless steel appliances, in-unit laundry, there's central heating and cooling. There is 1 assigned parking space per bedroom. So if you're renting a 2-bedroom, for example, you will have 2 parking spaces that are assigned to your unit. There's also additional off-street parking for visitors. And the community has designated open spaces, play areas for children. There's access to local biking, walking paths. It is a smoke-free community. That includes the apartments and the common areas. Tenants will be responsible for electricity costs. So that includes electric heat, hot water and cooking. Cold water and sewer charges will be included in your rent, though. So the 15 apartments are being made available through this application process. and will only be rented to households who qualify for the lottery. In order to qualify for the lottery, one of the eligibility criteria is that your household can't make or have an income of more than 80% of the area median income for Nantucket. So I'll go through what those numbers are in a few minutes, but that's one of the main eligibility criteria for this lottery. There are affordable studio, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom apartments being made available. And they're being offered through 6 different buildings. Each building is relatively small. It has between 8 to 10 apartments in it, and they include market rate and affordable apartments in each building. So in this lottery, let me go back to this other slide, there are a total of 4 studio units. The studio units has 450 square feet, and they'll be renting for $1,593. There are 5 1-bedroom units that are between 675 and 750 square feet, and they will rent for $1,816. There will also be 4 2-bedroom units renting for $2,009, and those 2-bedroom units have between 850 and 1,000 square feet. And then there's also 2 3-bedroom apartments that will be 1,100 square feet and will rent for $2,206. One of the 2-bedroom units is considered disabled accessible. So for persons with mobility impairments, that unit would be considered compliant. So the affordable rents, they're not set in accordance for this affordable housing program. They're not set in accordance with anyone's individual income or financial circumstances. So what I mean by that is the rent amount is fixed. It's not going to change if your income changes, like it might if you had a voucher, for example. Excuse me. So for this rental housing program, the rents are set using a formula that is based on HUD, which is the Department of Housing and Urban Development, their area median income that is released every year for the Nantucket area. So the rents might increase once per year, and that typically occurs in the spring when HUD revises their AMI amounts. But advance notice would always be given to residents whenever a rent increase is going to occur. The amounts are usually pretty modest, between $25 and $75 a month. And the rents will never change in the middle of your lease term. So if you are leasing up in one of these apartments at Richmond Meadows 2 in April, for example, and HUD changes the AMI amounts and therefore the rents go up for April, you're not going to have to pay a higher rent amount. The amounts that you see on your screen now are going to be the amounts that these initial leases are signed for. You wouldn't have to worry about a rent increase until at least 2025. So it is possible, and I think we already have more interested and eligible applicants for this lottery than there are available units. So there's 15 units. There is likely going to be more than 15 applicants. So the apartments are going to be made available through this lottery process. And yeah, just a little bit more information there on the property. So again, just a reminder, if you have any questions, let me know. I'm going to go over the eligibility requirements next. So there's 4 main eligibility requirements that are listed in your information packet. The first is households need to have, or applicants need to have, qualifying income to be able to be entered into this lottery. So I'll talk a little bit more about what those parameters are, but again, it's that 80% of area median income. The second eligibility criteria is that households are going to be given priority based on household composition. So for example, if you're a 1-person household, or maybe you're a couple that shares a bedroom, you're generally considered to be a type 1 household. When you're filling out your application, you're going to be indicating what household type, quote unquote, you that you fall into. And the application gives you more information about household type. So if you're a type 1 household, you can apply for an affordable 2-bedroom unit, but the larger type 2 and 3 households, generally households with more members, are going to be placed ahead of you on a 2-bedroom waiting list. So just keep that in mind. You won't have priority for larger units if you are a smaller household. The third eligibility criteria doesn't come up very often, but you cannot have financial interest in the development. So you can't be considered a related party. If you know someone or if you work for the developer or the management company, you won't be eligible for this opportunity. Households also can't own homes upon move-in. So if you own a home now and you're looking to rent at Richmond Meadows, you would need to have sold the home prior to signing a lease. Again, not something that comes up a whole lot, but want to mention it. So the income limits. Since these affordable apartments are being made available at rental prices that are lower than identical or very similar market rate units within the building, they're only going to be rented by qualifying households, households who qualify for the affordable program. So the maximum income limits are on your screen now, and they're set by household size. So that's going to include everyone in your household. And these are listed everywhere. They're on the website listing, they're in the information packet, they're on the application. So you don't have to write them down or anything, but you can see maybe where you would fall based off of this graphic here. So if you're a 1-person household and you're looking to rent one of these apartments, your income, your total household income cannot be above $69,800. If you're a 2-person household, for example, that maximum income amount is $79,800. So just a reminder, again, we're not going to require that you submit verification of income with your lottery application, but I do want to go over a little bit about how we will calculate your income once you do need to submit all of that information after the lottery. So if you're found eligible for this lottery, you're going to be sent a documentation requirements guide, which is basically a document that's going to detail exactly what types of documentation we're going to need from your household in order to confirm your program eligibility. And that's going to depend on what your sources of income are. So if you're working, for example, it's going to let you know how many pay stubs we'll need from you, how many bank statements. All of that is going to kind of vary based on your specific financial circumstances, how your income is coming into the household. All households, though, are going to need to submit a copy of your federal tax returns from last year. So just make sure that you have that handy for later on in the process. So income for this program is counted as a projection of your income over the next 12 months for all household members. So in order to project or predict what your income is going to be for the next year, we're going to have to look back for the last few months to see what you have been making, what everyone in your household has been bringing in, so we can make that projection. The only types of income that are not included when we're looking at your total household income is income by minors or wage income by minors. So if you have a minor in your household, someone under the age of 18 who is working, we're not going to count their wages towards your total household income. And then the only other exception is full-time students. So it could be, a 22-year-old, someone who is over the age of 18 who's working, but they're also going to school full-time. That person would only count the first $480 of their wages. We are required to count gross income, not the net income, when we're looking at your total household income. So that's the amount before taxes. We recognize, obviously, that most of us do not take home our gross pay because we're paying, taxes, health insurance, that sort of thing. But for this program, we are required to count the gross income. How we calculate your income is not always one size fits all, so everyone's income circumstances are unique. Some households have very consistent weekly salaries, you know, you take home the same amount on your paycheck every week or every other week. There are some people also who are working seasonally or they're self-employed. In those circumstances, we might need to look further back into the past in order to project your anticipated income for the next 12 months. Specifically for applicants who are self-employed, you're going to need to complete a profit and loss statement to show us what you've been making throughout the year. There is, and provide supporting documentation for your business as well. If you're self-employed, your business expenses are taken into account, so just keep that in mind. We do have a sample profit and loss statement that you'd be able to use if you don't have your own already. For anyone who is not self-employed, it's always going to be the gross income we count. We're not able to take other expenses into consideration if you're not self-employed. So for example, sometimes we get a question, you know, I'm paying for a car payment. Can you reduce my total household income based on that expense? And the answer is no, unfortunately. So in general, any income that you have been making, we need to assume that you will be making it going forward, unless you have some sort of definitive documentation from your employer, for example, that's saying, you know, no one is eligible for overtime in the coming year, that sort of thing. We wouldn't be able to count overtime for you in the projected new income if that was the case. So when you're looking at the application, the lottery application, just make sure that you write down every income source that you have, not just wages, but, you know, think of if you have any Social Security, child support, excuse me, workman's comp, unemployment, a pension coming in. Just make sure that all of that is listed on your application, just to avoid any confusion going forward. There is no minimum income for the affordable housing program. However, most management teams, including the team at Richmond Meadows, wants to be sure that all residents, all tenants can afford their rent, regardless of whether or not you're renting a market rate unit or an affordable unit. So the management company has set a minimum household income, which is equivalent to 2 times the monthly rent. These amounts are in your information packet, but just a example. So for households looking to rent a 1-bedroom apartment, the approximate minimum household income would be $43,600. So your income would need to be between that income floor and the maximum income limits that we'd already discussed. If you have a mobile housing voucher like Section 8, you can disregard those minimum income amounts because they won't apply to your household. And that's because your voucher is going to be picking up a portion of your rent. But if you do have a voucher, you're going to want to check with your housing voucher, check with the agency that issues your housing voucher to confirm that the rent amounts at Richmond Meadows will be allowable under the program's payment standards or maximum rents. Eventually, the leasing office at Richmond Meadows would be checking in with them to confirm that, but it would be best for you to know sooner rather than later if these amounts would work with your voucher. Everyone who doesn't have a voucher who's applying, again, like I said, your income would need to be between that minimum income floor and the maximum income limit. The only exception to that is going to be if you have liquid assets, if you have money tied up in a bank account that you'd be able to access in order to pay rent, the leasing office, when they're doing your lease screening, may look at that and say, okay, well, your income is slightly below the minimum income amount that was set, the 2 times the rent for the month, but you have a decent amount in bank accounts, will approve you for the lease eligibility. So ultimately, it's going to be the management or leasing team's decision during your lease screening whether or not you meet that minimum income threshold, but no one can be above the maximum income amount. There are no asset limits for rental opportunities. So you could have a significant amount of money in your bank accounts, for example. You might be retired, and that's perfectly fine. Just keep in mind that if there is any interest that is being earned, or any income interest that's being earned on your assets, those will count towards your total household income. So we are going to, even though there is no asset limit, we will need to ask for verification of assets, such as your bank statements, net cash value of any 401ks, retirement accounts, that sort of thing. We would not need documents regarding personal assets like jewelry or cars, though. All right, so I covered a lot of the eligibility criteria for the affordable housing program and the lottery. Again, just a reminder, if you have any questions, I'll keep checking the chat here, but feel free to let me know. So like I mentioned, we want to make sure that we're encouraging you to apply as soon as possible to get this process started. You can apply to more than one unit size. So if you think that you're interested in, for example, a studio and a one-bedroom, you should indicate that on your application. There's really no downside to doing that, but there is potentially a downside if you only apply to one unit size and then decide later on, you know, actually I only applied to a studio, but I am interested now in a one-bedroom. And what I mean by that is if you only apply to the studio and then you decide later you should have applied to both, that those one bedrooms might already be scooped up because the waiting list has already been established. So if you're interested in more than one bedroom size, definitely indicate that on your application. So once you submit your lottery application, we're going to review it. We'll contact you if there's any missing information or if anything appears to be incorrect. We'll give you that chance to resubmit. If you're found eligible for the lottery, you're going to be sent a lottery application number, and that will come in the form of an email. So you will get an email from us with that lottery application number, and if you're the first person to be approved for this lottery, your lottery application number will be A.001. It's just meant to be an anonymous identifier. It's not a ranking of any sort at this point. It's just, we don't want to be calling names during a lottery. So that's the number that you would want to be keeping in mind if you're watching the lottery, or if you're looking for your name on a waiting list at a later time. So that email that's sent to you is also going to confirm whether or not your household qualifies for local preference. So you will have indicated on your application if you believe your household qualifies for that preference. The verification that we'll need to confirm your local preference is not necessary until after the lottery. So after the lottery, if you indicated local preference, you're going to need to confirm that you either live on Nantucket, you work for the town, or you work at a business located on Nantucket, or maybe you have a child that's living with you who is attending Nantucket Public Schools. Up to 70% of the affordable units at Richmond Meadows will have local preference. So that means that there's going to be some local preference households who are going to have priority on those waiting lists. There's more information on local preference at the end of the information packet as well. That same email that has your lottery application number, it's also going to confirm the bedroom sizes that you applied for. It's going to indicate if you reported needing a disabled accessible unit. So just make sure that when you're looking at that lottery application number email, that you're making sure all of the information on there is correct. If the email says you applied for a studio, but you actually meant to apply for a studio and a one bedroom, you want to just let us know so we can make that change on our end. The other thing that's going to come in that email is an attachment to the documentation requirements guide. So that again is going to be the document that provides details on what sort of items that you're going to need to gather in order to submit them to us to confirm your income and assets and taxes and that sort of thing. So just take a look at that documentation requirements guide so that you are able to, start gathering that information, pay stubs, bank statements, that sort of thing, and putting it, kind of keeping a folder of everything that you might need to submit to us. During this whole process, if you are ever found to be ineligible for the lottery, you might be over income, for example, you'll be informed by email, and you're always encouraged to contact us with any questions so we can, confirm that everything is correct on our end. And if you have any questions, we can answer those for you. So again, with the household type on your application, you will have indicated whether or not your household is a 1, 2, or type 3. Smaller households are able to apply for larger units, but generally larger households are going to have priority over smaller households when it comes to those 2 and 3 bedroom units. The information packet has a lot more on household types, a lot more information on household types, and the priority of the waiting list. But as an example, a type 1 household can apply for a 2-bedroom, but all type 2 and 3 households are going to have priority over type 1 for that 2-bedroom waiting list. So the lottery itself is going to be held on January 25th at 6 p.m. It's going to be the same sort of format as this information session. It'll be on Zoom. Depending on the number of eligible applicants we have, the lottery numbers will either be drawn from a box, held up to the screen, and recorded, or they will be digitally randomized. I'll do a screen share, and you'll be able to see how the numbers were all sorted on the computer. Every lottery number is a part of the drawing. So every lottery number is going to be picked and is going to have a position on the waiting list. So sometimes when you think of a lottery, you're thinking, okay, if there's 15 units, there's going to be 15 numbers called. But that's not the way that these types of lotteries work. These lotteries are held to establish an order for the waiting list. So in general, it is going to be more beneficial to you if your number is called early on in the process, but it might not be that deciding factor as to whether or not you'll be moving forward to lease one of these apartments at Richmond Meadows. So a reason for that is, say a type 1 household is drawn first in the lottery, and they've applied for a 2-bedroom unit. They're still going to be behind all of those type 2 and type 3 households on that 2-bedroom waiting list. They're not going to have the first priority just because they were called first. Also, there might be households who were entered into the lottery that are later found to be ineligible. Maybe the leasing office finds them ineligible for some issues on their application, or maybe they ultimately just decide they're not interested in renting at Richmond Meadows anymore. So just keep all that in mind, because if your number is drawn later on in the lottery, you could still have an opportunity to move forward in this process and lease one of these apartments. So after the lottery, we will populate the waiting list, and we're going to take local preference into consideration. We're going to take household size into consideration, and we'll do our best to send those waiting lists out to all households as soon as possible. Usually it is that night after the lottery. When you're looking at that email, you're going to want to find your lottery application number and see where you fall on the waiting list. So after that, you should have a better idea as to whether or not you're going to be moving forward in the process. And that next step will be applying for a lease with the management company. You'll have about 5 days to connect with the management company. We'll give you their information and all of that after the lottery, so you can contact them to get that lease screening process underway. And just a reminder again, SCB Housing is going to be screening you for lottery and program eligibility, but the lease screening is done by the leasing office. Just be aware that leasing offices usually invite more households to complete the lease screening than there are available units. So for example, for this lottery at Richmond Meadows, there are 5 one-bedroom affordable units, but they're probably going to invite more than 5 households forward to complete the screening, their lease screening. And this is a typical practice at management companies. It's done because sometimes the process of leasing units is slowed down by households who don't qualify for their unit. So they want to have, a number of applications going at once. And so that's a reason to, if you're renting right now, we want to make sure that no one is giving notice to their current property owner because they're interested in renting at Richmond Meadows. There's still a few, steps in the process that need to happen before you're fully approved. Once the leasing office has approved your application, that's the point in the process where you'll be able to reserve one of the affordable units. So if you have the top position on that one-bedroom waiting list, you're going to have the first chance to reserve one of the affordable one-bedroom units. And that's true even if someone below you on the waiting list finishes their lease application first. The order of the waiting list always needs to be maintained. So if you have the first position on the waiting list, you have first choice of unit. And then the second person on the waiting list will have second choice, and so on. Once you've reserved an apartment, the leasing office is going to notify us here at SCB Housing, and we'll contact you to coordinate, the program, the finishing up your application, which is to submit all of that supporting documentation, income, asset, and tax documentation that you haven't yet sent to us for your final review. So hopefully by that point, you've been able to review that documentation requirements guide, and you have most of that information set aside. You'll have about 10 days to complete that process with SCB Housing. If you don't submit everything to us on the first try, that's completely fine. There's going to be checklists sent out to you, giving you more time if you need it. We're working with you to get this application complete. The program certifications are good for 6 months. So I don't anticipate that it'll take you more than 6 months to lease at Nantucket, at Richmond Meadows, but we just want to keep that in mind. If you have your certification and you're approved by SCB Housing in, February, you would need to lease before August, or else you would just need to do the process again in terms of submitting documentation to us, submitting updated income and asset documentation. So once you've leased at one of these affordable apartments, you're done with lease screenings until the lease renewal. And about 3 months ahead of your lease renewal, say you leased up for April 2024, you'll be contacted sometime in early 2025 to start this process. And you'll need to recertify your income with the leasing office in order to renew your lease. If your income has increased and is now above 80% of the area median income, that's completely fine. Households can remain eligible for the affordable apartment as long as the household income doesn't exceed 140% of the current year's AMI. So there's a little bit of wiggle room there that you'd still be eligible for the apartment if your income is increased. Those 140% figures are in the information packet, but just to give you an example, so a household of 2 would qualify for this lottery as long as you make below $79,800. That same family can make up to $720 at the time of their recertification in order to remain eligible for the affordable apartment. So just keep that in mind. You can have an income increase in that first year. You're not going to be, asked to move at your lease renewal date if you no longer qualify under those initial parameters. So that covers everything that I wanted to get through in terms of the information in the information packet and just a little bit of information on the actual property. So if you have any questions that I didn't get to, please let me know. I'll stick around for a minute here. And again, I'm going to put up our email address and our phone number just so you know where to contact us after tonight if you have any questions that you think of, or if you're watching this after the fact. And then again, the lottery application is due January 12th. So make sure to get that in if you're interested in these apartments, and we will work with you to get you a lottery application number and hopefully get you into this lottery. All right, if there's no questions, I appreciate you joining me tonight, and we look forward to getting your application. Thanks, Will. Have a good night. Thank you.